Hey folks, welcome back for another build video. This time around, we're focused on maximum skill damage with a little bit of restraint. So previously on this channel, we have put out a maximum skill damage video. And specifically, what I meant by that was maximum skill damage with your striker drone and assault turret, which is a very common combination for skill builds, given the automated nature of both of those. And while I still stand by that video as a great template for how to get the maximum amount of skill damage out of both of those skills, one thing I made note of in that video and continue to believe is that while that video does give you the maximum amount of skill damage, it also leaves you on quite the knife edge, given that you have no cores invested in armor and you're sporting the glass cannon talent, which obviously amplifies the amount of damage you take and makes it much easier for you to go down. So today we're revisiting that concept with a little bit of a twist. We want to give ourselves a little bit more survivability while still maintaining a phenomenal amount of skill damage. And I do want to make a note, moving forward I will use the words skill damage, and I am referring specifically to the assault turret and the striker drone here. Obviously, if you want the absolute maximum amount of skill damage in a single hit in this game, you're going to want to go with the demolitionist's mortar turret. So I just want to get that out of the way off the top. When I'm saying skill damage, I am referring to the assault turret and the striker drone here. And I am aware that there are higher combinations of pure per hit skill damage. So with that out of the way, let's get into this build. For our specialization, we've gone with the technician. That +1 skill tier from the amped talent is just too good to pass up. It gives us the freedom to roll an armor core on our Kneepads there, as you can see down the bottom. For our primary weapon, we've gone with the Harmony rifle here, which sports the perfectly in sync talent. Hitting an enemy grants plus 20% skill damage for 5 seconds, and using a non-shield skill or damaging an enemy with a skill grants 20% weapon damage for 5 seconds. On top of that, damage increases are doubled while both buffs are active for the same time. So the way you should read this, given that you're using the assault turret and striker drone, which are damaging enemies almost constantly, is that as long as you are winging enemies with this rifle, you are getting an extra 40% skill damage and 40% weapon damage. And given that this is a non-hybrid tier 6 skill build, the more important point there is the plus 40% skill damage for both your assault turret and your striker drone. I do want to make a note that this is a Dark Zone exclusive drop, so the only way you're going to get this is by foraging into the Dark Zone or praying to the random number generator to get it out of a named item cache, as that is a way to get Dark Zone exclusive items in the Light Zone. But luckily, if you don't want to do either one of those things, there is the test subject named assault rifle that sports the exact same perfectly in sync talent, just on an assault rifle instead of a rifle variant. Now personally, why I've gone with the Harmony here is I just think it pairs better with the idea behind this build, where you are taking cover, allowing your skills to do the majority of the damage, and then using your rifle to hit long-range targets to proc that perfectly in sync talent. For a secondary weapon, we've gone with the Scorpio shotgun. Now this weapon is the primary reason why we don't have the capacitor assault rifle on this build. While the capacitor assault rifle does have a higher ceiling than perfectly in sync, it does require a build up from those 0 to 40 stacks to get you that plus 60% skill damage. And on top of that, it would stop us from having the Scorpio shotgun on this build, which again, with a more reserved focus when compared to the absolute maximum skill damage you can get, this shotgun is a great way to stun lock your enemies, specifically with the level 3 disorient and the level 6 shock there. So if you are rushed in your cover position, you can use the shotgun to disorient them, shock them, and then find new cover while your skills continue to take them down. And then you can switch back to your primary weapon and proc perfectly in sync to instantly get an additional 40% skill damage. For a sidearm, we've gone with the TDI card custom here. The +1 skill tier is being wasted. I do want to make a note of that, but rather crucially, it does have the in-sync talent here, giving us an additional 30% skill damage and 30% weapon damage for 5 seconds. So while the TDI card custom is not strictly necessary, given that it is also a Dark Zone exclusive drop, you could go a number of different routes here, but I do suggest either having in sync or the Future Perfect talent on your sidearm. Quite honestly, Future Perfect might be a great way to go for your sidearm, as it gives you an additional option with your weapon talents, and a way to grant overcharge for your skills on your sidearm. For our mask, we have our first piece of Empress International giving us plus 10% skill health. That is going to be particularly important on higher difficulties, as the enemies are more likely to target your skills, specifically your drone, and try to take them out. So that plus 10% skill health will help keep them out longer. On top of that, we've gone with armor regen, skill damage, and skill haste in the mod slot here. One note I do want to make, while a lot of the times armor regen as an attribute is seen as a bit of a weakness, given that it's a static value of only 4,925 HP per second, when you've only invested one armor core into a build and you have less than 1 million armor, that armor regen attribute actually does make a little bit of a difference here, especially when you stack as many as we have on this build. So I do actually recommend this. Between that and the fact that skill haste is a diminishing returns attribute, my personal recommendation remains armor regen and skill damage as your attributes as much as you can. But obviously your mileage may vary. You could obviously go skill haste, skill damage, and skill haste in your mod slots if you so choose. For a backpack, we have the Force Multiplier, which gives us one piece of Hanayu Corporation for plus 10% skill haste. On top of that, we have skill damage, armor regen, and skill haste again here in the mod slot. And then for the talent, we have the Perfect Combined Arms. Shooting an enemy increases total skill damage by 30% for 3 seconds. So in order to keep this proc, you will have to pop out of cover every 3 seconds or so to give yourself that additional 30% skill damage. But as long as you do that, this is a great way to keep your skill damage up all of the time. Now for our chest piece here, we have one piece of Wyvern Wear giving us plus 10% skill damage. And again, the familiar refrain here, we have skill damage, armor regen, and skill haste in our mod slot here. And then for our talent, we have kinetic momentum. So along with our weapons, this is the other major change from the previous iteration of this build that we've done. Kinetic momentum compared to glass cannon has a slight decrease in overall skill damage, but what you gain is obviously the fact that you don't take additional amplified damage against yourself. The other trade-off, of course, is that the stacks now increase your total skill damage by 1% up to 15 stacks per skill, and these are lost when on cooldown. So when you first start an encounter, when you're in combat, your skills are going to generate a stack while active or not on cooldown. It's going to take a little bit of time for those to get up to maximum, but once they do, they will remain at maximum unless either of your skills are destroyed or reset. So as you'll see later in the video, you'll have 2 icons indicating kinetic momentum, one for each skill, and both of those will build to a maximum of 15 stacks per skill, giving you a maximum of 30% skill damage. Now, while that is equal to the percentage provided by the sacrifice chest piece, it doesn't actually work out that way in the math. It's a little bit less, right around 1 or 2% less, so not all that significant. Honestly, the difference really here is going to be at the beginning of an encounter, you're going to have to see your skill damage ramp up as those stacks increase. But as long as you're comfortable with that trade-off, this is a much more defensive piece to go with, given that you're not amplifying the damage that you are personally taking. So there we have it, Wyvern Wear with kinetic momentum on the chest piece. With that, we will move into our gloves for our second piece of Empress International. That gives us our plus 10% skill damage bonus. And along with that, we have skill damage and armor regen in the attribute slots here. And obviously with all of those pieces, if you want more skill haste instead of armor regen, you can go that route. If you want critical hit chance instead of armor regen, you could certainly do that too. But again, for my money, given that we haven't really invested in our weapons, that critical hit chance feels a little bit wasted. And with this build, the most important point is that you want to keep yourself upright so that your skills remain active. So that's what the armor regen is really trying to do, just keep you alive while your skills do the majority of the work here. With that, we get into our waveform exotic holster, and that supports the alternating current talent, which generates a stack of 3% skill damage on one of your skills every second, and that is capped at 10 stacks for a maximum of 30% skill damage. And then after 10 seconds at the cap, these stacks transfer from your other skill, and then this process repeats ad infinitum, as they say. So what that means is at any one time, your skills will be between 0 and 30% additional skill damage. And as you'll see again in the video, there are 2 indicators for alternating current, one for each skill. And as one decreases, the other one increases as they alternate from 0 to 30% maximum. So obviously what that means is that the average over an encounter, given that you have skills that are both out almost the entire time, is that the average gain of this holster is 15%. Now I do know that some people don't like the waveforms alternating current talent. Given the way that it seesaws back and forth between your skills, it means that you're unable to guarantee that one skill will have that 30% maximum at any one time. And that really does bother some people, and I commiserate with that. So as a possible variation to the waveform holster, you could go with a second piece of Hanayu Corporation here instead to give yourself an additional 10% skill damage, as well as skill damage and skill haste in the attribute slots, matching what is provided by the waveform holster. So the difference here is really a difference of 5% skill damage on average, because again, as we said, with the waveform holster, you're going to be alternating between 0 and 30%, which gives you an average of 15%. And here on the Hanayu Corporation holster, you're picking up 10% skill damage with that second brand bonus. So really it is up to you whether you would like an average of 15% that is really anywhere between 0 and 30% at one time, or if you would like the consistency but slightly lower benefit of 10% skill damage all the time from Hanayu. Either one is a very defensible choice, so really it is up to you, and honestly it may just come down to whether or not you have a waveform holster. If you don't, a second piece of Hanayu is a perfectly reasonable way to go as well. With that, we will move on to our knee pads, where we have our third piece of Empress International giving us that plus 10% skill efficiency, which, as we talked about in the previous iteration of this build, skill efficiency is a roll up skill, meaning that when you get 1% of skill efficiency, you are really getting a combination of 1% skill damage, 1% skill haste, 1% skill duration, 1% skill health, 1% repair skills, and 1% status effects. So that is a very powerful brand bonus, particularly on this build, as we are directly benefiting from skill damage, skill haste, duration, and skill health, all on just that one brand bonus of skill efficiency. On top of that, for these knee pads, you can see there we've rerolled our core attribute from a skill tier to an armor core, giving us a little bit more survivability at the expense of having to try and find a piece that natively rolled with skill damage and skill haste. So while that does take a little bit of time, I do recommend trying to get that piece, as that additional armor core will help you stay alive during those encounters where you do get hit a little bit or find yourself in a bad situation. That extra bit of armor can be the difference between what takes you down and keeps you up. With that, let's get into our skills. We have our assault turret and our striker drone. If you've played this game any significant amount of time, especially on the summit in particular, you will find a version of this build rocking around. The assault turret and the striker drone are just a great combination to have, given how automated the skills are. You don't need to monitor them. You don't really even need to aim them if you don't want. They will go out, find an enemy, and attack the hostile target until they're taken down. On top of that, in the video that you'll see later, you can manually target specific enemies, which if there's a particularly hard boss or just a very dangerous enemy, you can focus both the turret and drone and your rifle on one enemy all at the same time and really take them down quickly. It is quite honestly an awesome sight to behold. Given that these are both tier 6 skills, you're getting plus 120% damage and plus 420% health, which is a particularly large amount on your turret here. As you'll see there, over 6 million health to work with. And on top of that, it will draw attention away from you. So one of the things I do suggest doing with your assault turret is set it up at a location that has a very good sight line of your enemies, because obviously you're not really going to be able to move easily within an encounter, but somewhere that is not directly next to you, as enemies, particularly drone operators and grenaders, will target your turret more often than you, as very rightly so. They will assess that your turret is a more dangerous target than you are. So if you set up your turret away from you. You can draw attention away from you and then use your turret and your drone to target enemies individually, while you use your rifle to proc perfectly in sync, and then use your Scorpio shotgun to get out of the corner if you do get rushed. On top of that, we have our striker drone here, which is also at tier 6, so it gets 120% skill damage and that additional 420% health. But even with those buffs, you will see that it has significantly less health here, with the striker drone only at around 3 million health. So as I mentioned off the top, at higher level difficulties, you will see your drone get taken down more often. So one of the things I would recommend is maybe managing your striker drone more manually than you would otherwise. You can target specific enemies that are separated from the group, or you can double tap whichever button you have it mapped to draw it back to you and keep it out of the most dangerous fire. Because as we went into on the chest piece, if either of your skills get destroyed, it resets half of the kinetic momentum talent, dropping your overall skill damage. So it is imperative during an encounter to try and keep your skills active as much as possible if you can. But with that all said, whether you go with the waveform or the second piece of Hana-Yu, this is a great build to use. I have this one in my loadouts almost constantly. I'm not always running it, but when I run up against particularly difficult content, I will absolutely pull it out and use these skills to help me get through it. I highly recommend you take this one for a spin. Give it a try. Let us know what you think in the comments. As always, like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, and tell your friends about the channel so you can continue to help us grow and make videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.